Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for spending a part of your day today with us as we discuss media and race. My name is Alan Buck, and I'm the director of the Digital Communication Program and an assistant professor here at Meredith College. I don't know where everybody currently is, but here in Raleigh, the sun just came out for the first time in a while, and my hope is that it soon reaches you as well. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to let everyone know that immediately after Byron's talk this afternoon, he has graciously offered to answer a few questions, and I seriously hope you take him up on that. Please utilize the Q&A function, which is the bottom of your Zoom bar, and I will moderate and handle the questions and then read them out loud. Now, without further delay, allow me to introduce you to our special guest, Byron Pitts. Byron Pitts was named co-anchor of ABC News Nightline in 2014. He has covered national news stories and in-depth features for the network, reporting across the news division, including Good Morning America, World News Tonight with David Muir, This Week, and 2020. Pitts is a multiple Emmy Award-winning journalist and news veteran with over 20 years of experience, known for his thoughtful storytelling, on-the-ground reporting, and in-depth interviews. After less than 24 hours at ABC News, Pitts immediately joined the network's live special coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing investigation. Since then, Pitts has gone on to report live from Baltimore, Dallas, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana during each city's recent riots and protests. He's also co-anchored a special edition of Nightline with Juju Chang from Los Angeles, looking back on the city 25 years after the riots that broke out following the Rodney King verdict. During the 2016 election, Pitts was a key part of the network's coverage from the Republican and Democratic national conventions and the first presidential debates to 7 hours of live election night coverage. In the 30 days leading up to the election, Pitts traveled around the country for Inside the Final 30, a daily docuseries produced by Nightline, to speak with voters as they were coming to their final decisions about who should be the nation's next president. It took viewers behind the scenes on the campaign trail and focused on the issues that matter most to Americans, as well as revisited key moments that shaped the direction of the race. Prior to joining ABC News, Pitt spent 15 years at CBS News, where he served as chief national correspondent for the CBS Evening News, filled in regularly for 60 Minutes, and won an Emmy Award for his coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He was named National Association of Black Journalists Journalist of the Year in 2002. His 2009 memoir, Step Out on Nothing, How Faith and Family Helped Me Conquer Life's Challenges, which I've read, chronicled his journey overcoming illiteracy and a stutter to become a journalist. In 2017, Pitts profiled 6 young adults that overcame hardship with hope in his book, Be the One. Pitts began his career at WNCT TV in Greenville, North Carolina, where he covered local news and served as weekend sports anchor. He graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1982, where he studied journalism and speech communication. Pitts is a native of Baltimore and currently lives in New York City, and I'm honored to call him my friend. Byron Pitts, everyone.
Hey guys. Hey everybody, I hope you can hear and see me okay. Alan, are we good? Can people hear and see me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Hi guys, it's great to be with you. I'm actually in Nashville, Tennessee today, so not all that far. I'm jealous because up in New York these days, it's been in the 30s and 40s. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then Alan and I have a conversation, and I look forward to answering any questions you guys might have. You know, I'm a professional journalist. I went to a small liberal arts college at Ohio Wesleyan. When I was there, student body of about 2,000 students, a co-ed school, comes out of the Methodist tradition. A little bit about my background. As Alan said, I was born and raised in Baltimore, proud son of East Baltimore, raised by a single parent. My mom had her first child at 17. She had me before she finished high school. I'd imagine my story is like a number of the students at Meredith. I was part of the first generation in my family to go to college. It's something my mother believed in deeply. This notion that college could change, that education could change the trajectory of someone's life. That's certainly the case for me. And so she insisted that my siblings and I go to college. Someone asked my mom once years later, how was she as a single parent? How was she able to send 3 kids to college? And my mom said, oh, it was simple. I told each child, you will go to college or I will beat you to death. And I'd imagine there may be a couple of you out there who had similar motivation to stay on track. I decided early on I wanted to be a journalist. I have to mention this. I won't go down this road too far, but I'm telling you about myself. I'm a person of faith. Um, I was born and raised Baptist, went to Catholic high school. Like I say, I had the best of both worlds, educated Catholic, raised Baptist. My faith is very important to me. I think it's probably the most important part of my life. Um, because of my professional life and things I've done, I'm respectful of all faiths. I have friends of all faiths, and I honor their traditions. But it was the great Yankee catcher Yogi Berra who once said, "Always dance with the one that brung you." So it is the faith I learned at my mother's knee that shaped the man I would become. I decided early on when I was in college, I decided early on I wanted to be a professional journalist. As Alan mentioned, growing up I had some challenges. I didn't learn to read until I was almost 13 years old. I spoke with a stutter until my junior in college. But by the time middle school, early high school, when I began to master reading a bit more, I fell in love with words. I was fortunate the church I grew up in Baltimore, near the end of the civil rights era, was engaged, and our church was a sort of one of those churches that would have fundraisers. I remember as a boy hearing Martin Luther King Jr. speak, hearing his father speak, hearing his wife Coretta Scott King, who many people don't know was a trained opera singer, would come to our church to put on concerts to raise money. And so that was a big influence in my life to see. I used to go to, my mother used to take me and my siblings with her to rallies that she would go to in support of our church. And I remember as a boy seeing how the police would behave if journalists were present. It would be, "Excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir, please step back." But if there were no journalists there, the police oftentimes were far more aggressive. So I saw as a boy the power of the media to keep the powerful accountable, and that stuck with me. I remember, being with my mom when she heard that Dr. King had been assassinated, and this information coming over the radio impacted this woman who I respected and revered so much that, again, I saw the power of the media to touch someone with information. And being a person of faith and believing that God has a purpose for all of us, I kind of landed that maybe it'll be my job to be a journalist. And what's a journalist? The job of a journalist is to afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted, shed light in dark places, give voice to the voiceless. And because of my early issues with literacy, my stutter, being a person of color in a nation where being a person of color can often be challenging and where you sometimes feel the weight of being voiceless, then I felt like everything at that point in my life had been preparing me for this kind of opportunity. And I leaned into that. So freshman year in college, I decided I wanted to be a journalist. I remember sitting in a freshman orientation class, and the professor asked, "So what's your dream? What do you want to do?" And I remember saying I wanted to be a journalist. Well, one of the letters I struggle with as a stutterer are J's. So when it came time to say journalist, I stammered. And I remember some of my classmates, laughed, snickered. Like, "Dude, you can't even speak clearly. How are you possibly going to be a journalist?" And that's where I think my faith, my mother believed, her name was Clarice Pitts. My mom believed there was nothing that prayer and faith and hard work couldn't overcome. And that certainly had been the story of my life and my family's life. So I thought, okay, they laughing now, but someday. So, I worked for the school newspaper. I worked at a radio station. I worked for a local cable station in town. I had like 5 jobs in college. While going to class, I played football. I was on a wrestling team. So I had a pretty busy, rich life. Not a great student. I know a number of you guys, you will graduate with honors, cum laude, magna cum laude, summa cum laude, all those fancy titles. I graduated, thank you, Lordy. I graduated in 4 years. That's as much as I can say from my college education. I was not a great student. I was a hardworking student, but not a great student. For me, college was hard work. Anyway, so I finished Ohio Wesleyan. Graduate school was not an option for me. A, not a strong student. B, because of the economic circumstances of my life, I needed to get a job as quickly as possible. Couldn't get a job in my field. My first year out of college, I worked at a small historically Black college in Raleigh. I worked at Shaw University. It was my first job out of college. I was their sports information director. Since I played college sports, I love sports. So I could travel around with the sports teams and, write press releases and take pictures of games and feed it to the News and Observer. Like a great highlight for me would be if WRAL or WTVD would take some of the highlights I shot of our basketball team and put it on the air that night. I kept plodding along, though. I interned at WTVD when I was a junior in college. And then I went back there, hat in hand, and interned again after I graduated college. I affectionately said I was the oldest intern in the history of WTVD. Here I was with a college degree, hanging out with college sophomores and juniors, but still trying to, keep my hand in the business. One of my early, outside of my mom, I had some wonderful teachers in college, but one of my first mentors professionally was this guy, Larry Stogner. Now, many of you guys won't recognize that name, but I would imagine your parents certainly would, for those of you from the Raleigh area. Larry was an anchor at WTVD in Raleigh, Durham, and I was his intern in college. And so Larry is like a white dude from North Carolina, went to Carolina. I wouldn't say Larry was a redneck, but he certainly wasn't a brother from East Baltimore, right? So we had very different life experiences. But he was so kind to me. He was so supportive of me and nurtured my dream. And he reinforced what I had been learning in all of my life, that someone didn't have to come from my same circumstances. Someone doesn't have to be of my same race, same gender, that all kinds of people can pour into your life. So Larry was that guy. In college, I had a great professor. Her name was Ula Luz. She was my English professor. I wasn't one of her students. I just took one of her classes. She wasn't my advisor, but she ended up becoming my unofficial advisor who really helped me get through college. So, Larry sent me I applied for a bunch of jobs, as you guys will, as you finish school. Applied for a bunch of jobs in TV stations. Like I sent out 100 letters, 100 resume tapes. I got like 97 rejections. I heard no in like almost every conceivable way it can be delivered to you. Some nice no's, some no, not yet, and some like hell no, you suck, you have no future in this business. The whole range. And then so Larry heard about a job opening at WNCT, as Alan mentioned, down in Greenville, North Carolina. And they're one of the people who said, I suck. I have no future in television. He said, okay, well, send them the same tape, but this time when you send it, let me know and I'll call them. So Larry's a big time, TV guy in Raleigh. And so when Larry Stogner calls a little station in Greenville, North Carolina, like people get excited, like that's a big deal. And so Larry called and said, hey, Byron's a good kid. He works really hard. His family's from North Carolina. He'll work really hard for you, give him a chance. So the news director called me back. And this is a guy who didn't know through another friend who I knew at that TV station, that when this guy originally saw my resume tape, he's like, man, this kid is terrible. He's awful. He looks funny. He has a terrible voice. I don't think he has a future in this business. He should do something else. Well, the news director didn't know that I knew this story. This time he calls me because he just got a call from Larry Stogner, the big time TV guy. And he called me back and said, hey, Byron, I saw your tape and I loved it. Did you now? I thought to myself. And so he gave me the job and I moved forward in my career. But again, it was one more example of how, like my mother used to always say, that, there are a lot of things in life as a young person you don't know yet. And a lot of things in life you don't know yet that you don't know those things and will need to know those things. And the only way you'll ever find it out is if an adult tells you. That's fairly true. And sometimes the adults won't tell you if you're a jerk, if you're unkind, if you're selfish, if you're rude, if you're whatever. And so to me, that experience was one more example that, if I can be the kindest, nicest, hardest working kid I can be, then adults will come into my life, peers will come into my life who will let me know those things I don't yet know. So I really benefited from that. Worked in Greenville for about a year and a half. I made $8,600 a year before taxes. I remember my mom, as I lived at home when I finished college, and when I worked at Shaw, for example, I had my salary was $20,000 a year, big money, and I had an assistant, and I had a little school credit card that I could take people out to lunch, and I was fancy spancy. So, and living at home with my mom. And when I got my job in Greenville, and my mother, and I better understand this now as a parent, one of her first questions after I told her I got the job was, "How much are they paying you?" Again, as a parent now, I fully appreciate where that question comes from. So I said, "Oh, Mom, they're paying me $8,600. She was like, $8,600 a month? Oh my God, God is so good. Hallelujah." My mother starts speaking in tongues, for those of you familiar with speaking with part of the faith tradition. I'm joking. But anyway, she was so excited for me, like $8,600 a month. Oh my God. I said, "Oh, no, Mama, it's $8,600 a year." She's like, "What?" I said, "It's $8,600 a year." She says, "Boy, well, that's less than half what you make right now. It's far less than I pay for you to go to college. Why would a college educated man be so stupid to take a job making so little money?" And I explained to her, "Mama, I'm living my dream. This thing we talked about and prayed about." And my mom said, "Well, I didn't know I raised fools." And she walked away. She was pissed at me for several weeks. I was taking this job, making less money, but it worked out over time. Eventually, as life would have, the house she lived in until she died, I bought her that house. So the economics of it worked out, and so she saw the benefit of me taking the job in Greenville. The goal was always to make it to the network. It was a dream that actually Larry Stogner instilled in me. If there's a school of thought in my business that network TV is at the highest level, so I worked really hard. Was very fortunate. I worked in Greenville, Norfolk, Orlando, Tampa, Boston, Atlanta. 15 years in local television before I finally got my job at the network at CBS. I was based in DC, Miami, Atlanta, London, New York, where I've been now for the last 19 years. Not that long, but for a long time, I've been in New York, and it's been great. I was looking at the sort of mission statement of your college, and it said that the goal is to educate the students and help grow you and teach you the importance of integrity. I think that's so incredible. That's such an incredible value to have, and I think part of being an educated person is to have integrity. And what does integrity mean? I think is some measure of empathy. It's a moral compass, a standard by which you live your life. And I believe if one has integrity, then anything you decide to do with your professional life, in your adult life, you will do it well. Integrity is one of those soft skills that, you don't see on a job application. But people who I've known who've been most successful in my business for the long haul are people who have integrity. So I think it's wonderful that is built into the DNA of your college experience. That certainly it's important to, in a liberal arts education to experience a variety of things. And for those of you who have a chance to study abroad while you're in school and do fantastic internships, that's wonderful. I know the caliber of the professors there, so I know that you're getting a remarkable education. But the fact that integrity is a part of that, right? Because those of us of a certain age, we know a lot of really smart people who aren't good people. And I think we see that manifested in a variety of ways around the world and certainly in our nation. I think in this place that we got to in this divided America, if you will, I think one of the challenges there, and this isn't about left or right, even about the middle, but it's about integrity. And I think if we saw more integrity from our leaders from the left, the right, and the middle, that perhaps some of the pain we're having now as a nation, we wouldn't exist. And last thing I'll say about that, we'd like to continue the conversation with Alan, open up for questions. Now, for the record, I'm Baptist. So any of you who are Baptists, Baptists love to talk. So I'm happy to talk for the full hour. But I would like to answer any particular questions you have and to have a conversation. But one of the things I'm clear about, because as a journalist, in many ways it's been said that journalists write the first draft of history, and I believe that's true. And part of my job is to have a sense of history and to study history. And as a person of color, I'm mindful of parts of American history, in particular from my own life experience. And that for me, like America has always been divided, right? We have always been at odds about things from our inception, the nation's history with slavery, from Jim Crow. We have always been divided. There have always been communities who've had different conversations. And so, as a person of faith, as an optimistic person, as a journalist, I think there is value that we live in this tense time we live in right now, where things do seem uncomfortable. I think there is value for people, for good and decent people, to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. And one of the great things I think about your generation, educated people who will have integrity, that I think this is the perfect time for you all who are leaving school soon to be engaged in that process. Like, our nation needs your intellect. We need your integrity. We need your energy, your side of the world. So I always say, I think there's never been a better time to be a journalist in my professional life than right now. And I would think there's never been a better time to come out of college than this season you guys are living in, separate from what the employment opportunities may be, because it comes and goes. But this notion that our nation is hurting in some ways, that lives have been impacted by COVID-19, certainly the racial and political divide, the angst that people feel on so many fronts, and that you need fresh blood, you need newfound integrity in that space. And so I think you all are at the perfect moment in your lives to impact our nation and impact the world. So I'm excited for you. So, brother, any questions from you, or conversation, or where shall we go?
Absolutely no. I've got a couple of questions trickling in, but I'll just go ahead and start while those come in. I remember when I was in news, I was working 9/11, and I actually remember that was like my first instance of remembering you was your coverage of 9/11, and then we'll get to race and more in depth. But obviously, when you go to work every day, you don't know you're going to cover a major event. Looking back, how is covering that and being so on the ground that day? Because a lot of my students, they're young and they don't remember it, or they remember it from what their parents told them, and of course the rest of us remember it very well. But I have vivid images of you on the ground there. So just tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I am. I think I'm a couple things. I'm a very optimistic person for people who know me. I'm very intentional about how I live my life and how I prepare myself. So, in wanting to be this is a long answer to your question, but
it's fine.
It helps you understand sort of how I see things. Again, because I recognize I was not a strong student. I'm sure there's some young people in this call who, like, man, they don't have to study for tests. They walk in the next day, they ace it. And then there's some of us who have to struggle, study all night, stay up all night, take the test, and then do okay. Where someone next to us just like aced it, and we know they didn't work as hard as we did. I remember once in college, I stayed up all night to take a Spanish final. And because I stayed up all night, I actually fell asleep while taking the final. And the professor showed me grace and allowed me to retake part of it, because she realized I fell asleep because I stayed up all night. Anyway, let's answer your question. So in preparation to get to work for the network, I always make particular choices about where I work. So for instance, early in my career, I had a chance to work in either Norfolk, Virginia, Richmond, or my hometown of Baltimore. And actually a job offer from Raleigh. Raleigh would have been great because I knew the town, my family was there, my grandmama could see me on television. Baltimore was great. It's my hometown where I grew up. Richmond would have been great because it's the state capital and it's a bigger market than Norfolk. But I chose Norfolk because the Atlantic Fleet, the U.S. Navy, is based in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'd done my homework, and I knew that at the network level, or in our country, about every 10 years or so, our nation is involved in some sort of military conflict. That's just the history of our country. I also knew that by this time that every person who I really admired at the network level, I thought was really, really good, they'd all covered war at some point, whether it be Edward R. Murrow to Ed Bradley to Dan Rather, to Martha Raddatz, who's a colleague now, to the great Diane Sawyer. They'd all had experience covering the war. So I thought, well, if I go to Norfolk as a 22-year-old, as a 23-year-old, I'll work with young officers. So by the time I'm ready to be a network correspondent, because the average age of a network correspondent is age 35, by the time I'm 35 and ready to work at the network, they'll be senior mid-level officers that I'll have a relationship with, and they can be contacts, and they'll help me cover war. Later in my career, when I got better at the sort of blocking and tackling of being a journalist, I decided when I got to Atlanta, I had a pretty good reputation. I would try something for 2 months, where every day, because local television, you go live at noon, at 5, at 6, at 11. But I would, as opposed to scripting, writing out what I was going to say, I would just kind of wing it. And I would just, whatever was kind of on my mind at the time is what I would say. And I remember once one of the producers who I worked with would say, Byron, what's your roll cue? As in, what are you going to say so we know to hit the button to roll the tape? And I jokingly said, baby, we'll hear it together. Like, what? The roll cues will hear it together? No. I mean, whenever I stop talking, roll it then. I got some eye rolls. Anyway, so for the next month, I was purposeful, and I would think about what I was doing, but I wouldn't script. I wouldn't write it out. I would depend on what I knew about the subject matter. I would depend on my sense of the emotional climate that I was in. I would focus on who I'm talking to as opposed to the words. Anyway, fast forward to now get to your question. So 9/11 happens. I was in New York that day. The only reason why I became the lead correspondent for CBS that day, I was the only person in the building. So at CBS News, culturally, correspondents are not due at work till 10 o'clock, because oftentimes your day goes to 7 p.m. As it turns out, I was in the office earlier than normal. And usually I get to work early, right? The early bird catches the worm. I was in the office earlier that day to look at an interview I had done the day before with Harry Belafonte, the great actor, singer, civil rights activist. So I'm looking at that when one of my bosses said, hey, Byron, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. I need you to go downtown. Okay, man, cool, right on it. One of my many limitations is I'm like, it's hard for my mind to shift. If I'm on this task, it's hard for me to pivot over here. So I was very focused on screening these tapes. I wasn't thinking about going to Lower Manhattan to see a plane that might have bumped into a building. A few minutes later, he came back like, what the hell are you doing? I need you to go down. Like, okay, man. All right, fine, whatever. So I grudgingly closed my computer, got in the cab, went downtown. Anyway, so I'm there for the day, and it was the day that fundamentally I think changed our nation. I think all of us who were alive that day, I think it all touched us. Some people fall to their death. I remember seeing a man and a woman on one of the high floors, because I was standing at the base of the building, and they on one of the high floors, and I was standing with some New York City police officers. One of them said, "Oh, thank God." And we looked up, and it looked like this man and woman were comforting each other. Like you could tell they were, they appear to be talking to each other. They had their arms around each other. You thought, oh my God, it's a difficult moment. Thank God they had each other. About that time, they stepped out onto the ledge of the building and they jumped. And I thought, how awful the world must have been for them in that moment if their best option in life was to jump from a 110-story building. And so it seems like that and other things. And the building falls, we have to run, we come back, the second tower falls. So later that day, when I was talking to one of my bosses, and he said, "Well, Byron, you're going to do the lead story on the show tonight." Okay, great. And I need you to. I say, "Well, how much time do I have?" He says, "Hell if I know. Take as long as you want." And he hung up the phone. Okay. Earlier during that same day, there was a point where Dan Rather, our anchorman, came to me, and I was the only correspondent for CBS down at Lower Manhattan. And so I did a live show. I talked for like 12 minutes straight, which in my business is rare, right? And I remember thinking in that moment, like thinking back to the thing I'd done in Atlanta like 3 years prior. That's why I was doing that, to be able to speak based on what's going on around me, lean into the emotion of the moment, rely on the reporting I had done. And so that really helped me get through that moment. So I say all that to say, like, so for me, 9/11 was the worst day of my professional life, but also it was sort of one of the best days of my professional life because it reaffirmed a lot of the work I had done in preparation for that moment. I remember, like, I thought about at one point, I thought about my grandmother because I was trying to. One of the things I learned over the years as a journalist is I want to attempt to make big points in a small way so that anybody, no matter where they are, can relate to what's going on. So I was thinking about my grandmother. I'm in Lower Manhattan, things are happening. I'm thinking about my grandmother in Apex, North Carolina. And I knew that my grandmother had only been in New York a few times, had never been in Lower Manhattan, and certainly had never been in well, I take that back, but certainly had never been in Lower Manhattan. So I needed to help my grandmother and the grandmothers watching understand how eerily quiet it was in Lower Manhattan. This, the biggest city in the one of the biggest cities in the world, the center of the universe, is now like really, really quiet. In my family, when we gather at family reunions or visit home in the summertime, we always go by the family graveyard, and that's where we go to talk to relatives, right? And you see aunties and uncles, and you hear stories about relatives you never even knew. Some very heartwarming, some very funny. Anyway, and I remember walking in the graveyard, family grave, with my grandmother, and how quiet it would be. So one of my last lines, in thinking about my grandmother, Dan Rather said, "So Byron, how is it in Lower Manhattan right now?" And I said, "Dan, I've never heard Lower Manhattan this quiet, graveyard quiet." And I said that because I thought my grandmother in Apex, North Carolina, and a number of people who maybe have never been into a bustling city, but they've probably been in the reverent space of a graveyard. So all of my life experiences, how I sort of prepare myself as a journalist, came into play that day.
Yeah, I take two things away from that story. I mean, yeah, first of all, you did a phenomenal job because I remember
Thank
very
you.
vividly
Thank you.
watching because I was with the affiliate that you were with that time. And also, I tell my students this all the time, you are very smart and proactive in looking where you wanted to get their experience to get there. I tell my students all the time, go find the job you want on LinkedIn and work backwards, like look and see where they
Yeah.
went and do exactly that. So that's a good testament.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, brother. Absolutely. Like my late mother used to say, every dream has an address. Every dream has an address. And
Yeah.
the only way you get to where you want to go is if you know exactly where you're trying to get to. And so for me, early on in college, 18 years old, the goal for me was to become a network correspondent by age 35. My mother and I, in her bedroom, on our knees, prayed for that very specific thing. And sure enough, I got to CBS by the time I was 35. Then we prayed about, I wanted to be a 60 Minutes correspondent because that, for me, was sort of the holy grail in my business. And we set a target, because at that time, like the average age of a 60 Minutes correspondent was about 60. And so I thought, I'm gonna work really hard and the world will change. And so I'm gonna get there by 45, right? Which seemed like sort of a ridiculous goal at the time, being a freshman in college on academic probation, to be thinking that far in advance. But everything I did academically, everything I did professionally was for that goal. And to your point, bro, like that's kind of how like people who I know who've been most successful in my business, how I measure it, aren't necessarily the most talented. Certainly they all work really hard, but most times they're the most deliberate. Like a former colleague, Scott Pelley at CBS. Scott knew since he was in like 14 years old, he wanted to be at 60 Minutes. One of my colleagues now, David Muir, who's the anchor of ABC World News Tonight, a great guy from upstate New York. David wrote to his TV station, he was 12, asking for an opportunity to work there. And you look at like world-class athletes, professional athletes. There isn't, to my knowledge, a single world-class athlete in NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League who would say, you know what? It was a spring of my senior year in college. I thought, what the hell? I'm gonna try and be a professional athlete. Almost to a person, the WNBA. They will all would say, this has been their dream. This has been their goal since they were children. And to me, that's not coincidental. I think and it goes back to my mother's saying, every dream has an address, and you only get there if you know exactly where it is.
I like that. Very good advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me go to a couple questions in from students. Megan asked, what challenges and obstacles have you had to overcome being Black in the media realm or the media world?
Hey, Megan, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, as I, as I see it, there's it's not accidental that the majority of people still at the network level, though this is changing rapidly, are white men. And no disrespect to white men. Some of my closest friends are white men. But like, why is that, right? And so I've come to learn over the years that discrimination, racism, sexism, there's a wide range of what that means, right? I mean, there are people who are hardened, racist, sexist, bigots. Okay, fine. We all sort of recognize they're pretty easy to spot. But then there are other people on the spectrum where I've realized that the part of ism is ignorance, is a discomfort, is a lack of awareness. Like, I always tell people when I'm talking to young people in my business who are applying for jobs. So consider, I always tell us that when you go meet with an executive or someone who may hire you, look at the pictures around their desk and see if you see anyone who looks like you. And so what that means is if you walk into a white man, white woman executive's office, and all the pictures are of white people, that could be their spouse, that could be their children, their parents, their relatives, their family. Okay, if you walk in my office, most of my family pictures are Black people because I'm Black, therefore my mom is Black, my daddy's Black. You see the pattern, right? But also in my office is a picture of Betty Chen, an Asian American woman, a dear friend, Juju Chang, Asian American woman, Rodney Comrie, a Jamaican guy born in London, Joe Stombrowski, my best friend from high school, and his mama, Miss Gus, who was like a second mother to me. So this Joe's parents was a mixed marriage. His dad's Polish, his mom's Italian. And so you'll see this old white woman pictured on my desk. So hopefully what that says about me is that of the relationships that matter most to me are, the majority of them appear to be Black, but they're other people. And so I walk into a white executive's office and I don't see any pictures of anyone who looks like me. Doesn't mean that they're racist at all. But potentially what it says to me is that when they close their eyes at night and they think about the relationships that matter most to them, they may not see me. Doesn't make them racist. But it may be, so maybe potentially what it means, they don't see the potential that may exist in me. They can't relate a personal narrative to my narrative necessarily. And so then it's incumbent upon me to help them see me, help them see my humanity. Yeah, there have been moments. I remember when I first got my job at CBS, and I'd been an award-winning, I worked in local television for 15 years and, had won all the awards you can win. And I'm meeting with this a white executive, a woman, and she says, Byron, one of the reasons why we hired you, one of the things I admire most about you, so my chest gets swole. I'm thinking she's going to talk about, some award I won, or, I graduated from Ohio Wesleyan or something like that. She says, one of the things I admire most about you is how articulate you are. I thought, what? I've been a professional journalist for 15 years. And I've won every award you can win in our business. And the best you can come up with is I'm articulate. To me, it was a reminder of the, what's that phrase? The bigotry of low expectations. Hey, I don't know what happened there, right?
Oh, it's all right. No, I was like, what happened to follow you? I mean, like people are going to drop off like fries. Oh my God.
But to finish answering Mary, sorry about that. Finish answering Meredith's question, right? So, yes, there have been a number of times where the fact that I'm a Black man, either people had low expectations. For the longest time in my professional life, every TV station I ever worked at, I was replacing another Black man. Never in my career in local television did I fill a job vacancy by a white man, white woman, Latino man, Latino woman, Asian man, Asian woman, right? It was always another Black man I was replacing. There was an experience early in my career in a local TV station when I was anchoring, and one of the executives, the corporate executive, says, when the discussion was about giving me the job as a full-time job, and this executive says, as long as I run this company, inward will never anchor this broadcast. And that was chilling. It's one of the few times in my professional life I've ever shed a tear because I was just so angry about it. And I had to make some choices about that. So yeah, but frankly, there have also been opportunities. I would imagine, again, every station, local station I worked at, I was replacing another Black man. So one of the things they looked at in considering me was the color of my skin. I would imagine sometimes in my professional life, I've gone into communities and situations that I could navigate as a person of color that one of my white colleagues might have been more challenged by. So it's cut both ways. It has probably worked against me more than for me. I had an executive at CBS. I was having a problem with once. And I felt like one of the reasons we were having such a challenge was there was an issue of race, I felt. I mean, there are other things, but I thought that was one of the elements. And so he was dismissing me from his office one day and basically telling me I had no future. And I remember I walked to his doorway and I turned around. As I said, I'm from East Baltimore. And so being from East Baltimore, my late mom would say, violence is never the best option. But it's always an option. So part of me wanted to, reach across this desk and shake this guy. But I remember turning around and saying to him, sir, raise be respectful. So, sir, I respect what you've said. I even respect your job. But know this, when I am home alone in the dark on my knees, not once have I ever called your name. And so for me, it was a reminder. Certainly, I am a Black man and I am unapologetically Black, and I'm proud of that. But more than that, for me, I'm a child of God. And I am convinced that what God has for me, no man can give it, no man can take it away. So, yeah, I mean, so certainly it has been a challenge sometimes, but, the Bible says, count it all joy. I think about, what it says, to those whom much is given, much is required. And for all of us who've been given the opportunity to earn an education, no matter how you got there, with that comes responsibility. I always say that my worst day at work is still better than my grandmother's best day at work, more than likely. My grandmother was a domestic much of her life. My great grandmother was born a slave. So yes, yeah. So I'm okay with it. Like bring it on.
Good answer. And friend, I can tell you that if you walk into my office, I traveled to Rwanda last year, and I've got a piece of Rwandan art, a friend of me and my Rwandan friend, and then my
nice.
friend. So there you go.
Nice. Go, brother.
I'll send you a picture.
Thank you. Go.
All right. Gay Hill, she had asked a question right when your computer went off. This is a great question. Gay said, how do you retain your sense of optimism after seeing such terrible things like 9/11?
The great question. I think optimism is a choice. I think, I was raised to be that way because my mom is someone who's always authentically optimistic. To me, it's better than the option. And as a person of faith, I believe that dying is a part of living. Certainly, as a student of history, there have been countless events in history that have been heartbreaking. As a student of history, I've often seen that there is a goodness that comes out of hardship. Every place I've ever been where I've witnessed hardship, for me, I've seen the presence of God. I'll give you an example. Like I was in Haiti after the earthquake, and I'm standing in this courtyard in Port-au-Prince, and it's pitch dark. They have no power. They're having to use like hacksaws to cut off crushed limbs. They've run out of pain medicine, so they're giving people alcohol to numb the pain. And sometimes nothing but like a piece of leather or cloth to bite down on. It's awful. And so it's pitch black. And imagine you're in this space, pitch black. It's about the size of like a courtyard. And people are moaning, right? Because people are in different stages of distress. Moaning, crying. You hear people shuffling around as nurses and doctors are trying to get to people. It's pitch black. There's no power. So about this time, there's this woman who starts humming like really loudly. And it's someone who was raised in church and been to revivals. And sometimes, there will be like elders who will start singing, kind of moaning, and it changes the mood. Well, this woman's humming kind of changed the mood. And then she started singing by herself. So in the sea of all this heartache, there's this one voice singing of a woman. It sounded like an older woman. And then you hear someone else on the other side of the courtyard join her in song. And then somebody else on the other side of the courtyard. And you hear like there are men, there are women, there are older, younger people. They're all singing now. And I asked someone, what are they singing? So, well, they're actually singing the Haitian national anthem, which speaks to hardship and struggle. And so in the midst of their despair, to see the resilience of the human spirit. I've covered 2 executions in my career. A man put to death in the electric chair in Virginia, and Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, put to death by lethal injection. And so we're in the death chamber, and he's about to be put to death. And so we're like in a horse-shaped, basically hospital room, because that's about as close as you were to him. So on one side was lawyers and supporters, and in the middle were like 10 journalists. I was one. And on this side of the room, there were family members of the people, of the 186 people he killed. Husbands, wives, children, grandparents, aunties, uncles, all there, brothers and sisters. And so when the curtain goes around and we see McVeigh for the first time, he kind of sits up, he kind of stares at the journalist, this like menacing look. And then when he turned to give that same kind of mean look to these victims' families, he looked at them and then like he seemed surprised and he kind of humbled and like lay back on the gurney. And I looked at him, and what actually happened was, now the prison doesn't allow you to bring anything inside the death chamber. The journalists gave us pencils and a piece of paper to take notes, but nothing else you're allowed to bring in. Without ever discussing amongst themselves, the victims' families snuck in pictures of their loved ones. Women had it tucked in their bras, men in their belts. And when they saw McVeigh, they each on their own, without ever discussing, took the picture of their loved one and pressed it against the glass, as if to say, in a way, to sort of honor the person they had lost. And again, in that moment, to me, you saw the power of resilience, the power of family love, what it can drive you to do and drive you through. So yeah, I've seen a lot of bad things, but even in the terrible things I've seen the goodness. I've seen bravery. I've seen kindness. I've heard humor. I've seen decency. I covered 9/11 in New York, as you guys know. And I remember after the towers fell and people were making their way back down to the pile, there was this young Marine, 19 years old, on vacation from Arkansas, visiting New York, the big city, for the first time. And he made his way down to the pile. And so some police are yelling at him to come down, right? Because it's dangerous, right? Because the pile is a few stories high. And this young kid, I say kid, 19-year-old, they said, come down. They order him to come down. He said, sir, I can't. He said, I think I hear somebody. And I'm not gonna let him die. I'm not gonna let him die alone. 19-year-old. These weren't his family, his friends, his fellow Marines. These are just people he didn't even know. And he was willing in that instantaneous moment to put himself in harm's way to help somebody else out. So again, so in every bad situation I have seen, I've seen an equal measure of goodness. As Mr. Rogers used to say, or he has this great quote where his mother would tell him that when you're in a stressful situation, look for the helpers. And that's been my experience. Every bad thing I've seen, in that same space, there's somebody in that space, like rising to the occasion. So that's what keeps me hopeful.
Very good story. That gave me chills. Thank you, Byron.
Sure.
Don't want to keep you too long, so I think I've got time for one or two more. Let me.
And I'll give a Presbyterian answer. I've been giving Pentecostal answers. I'll give a nice, tight Catholic Presbyterian answer.
This is a good question. How do you feel about the state of journalism right now? Do you believe COVID, the rough political climate, unrest has led to a decline in integrity, or are they trying to get a more entertaining story?
No, I think it's caused serious journalists to be more serious. There was a time in my professional life, I give you a story, and I was at CBS. There's a colleague of mine who had heard about this crazy dude in the mountains of Afghanistan, like 6'5", filthy rich, hated America. and had like this cult-like following. And this journalist wanted to go interview him. About the same time, there was Britney Spears was giving a tour in Europe. And one of the accounting people said, well, why are we going to spend all this money to go to Afghanistan to interview some dude no one's ever heard of? Where you can go on this tour, it's in Europe, it's less expensive. We can get more bang out of the buck for this series on Britney Spears, because more people would rather see Britney Spears than this crazy dude in the mountains. And so they didn't go talk to the crazy dude in the mountains. That crazy dude in the mountains, Osama bin Laden. And so I've often thought, what if he had done that story and Americans, perhaps on some of those planes that were taken hostage, who realized that there was someone in the world with the means to harm America, might they have responded differently? So in today's journalism, it isn't as hard today to make the argument about the need to do a serious story on any given day. COVID demands that. This racial divide, this political divide demands that. So I think that's an opportunity for journalism. And I think just like in a relationship, just like your professors, just like you as students, your parents, I say this to my children, like love is given, but respect and trust, you got to earn that. And so I think as journalists, like we should have to earn people's trust every single day. And how do you earn their trust? Not by like fancy lights and catchy phrases. You earn their trust by telling them the truth soberly and as accurately as you can. You give them context. Like, it's not my job to give anyone's opinion. Now, people may assume what my politics are because I'm a Black man, but they may or may not be right. Like I would go to Trump rallies sometimes, getting like these discussions with supporters who, when they got close enough to stop yelling and they have a conversation. I remember having this conversation with these guys. This guy basically like called me a heathen, I don't know. God says, well, actually, I'm a deacon in my church. I love the Lord. What's your favorite scripture, brother? Let me tell you mine. And it was like, wow. Now, I can't imagine they stopped watching Fox and started watching ABC, but at least I was able to defend not just my own individual integrity, but the integrity of my profession. Is journalism flawed? Absolutely. Do people get it wrong? Absolutely. Are there people masquerading as journalists who are actually opinion people? Right? Like I tell people all the time, Rush Limbaugh, God bless his soul, not a journalist. Tommy Lauren, brilliant young woman, not a journalist. Chuck, what's the guy's name? Mika and what's her husband's name? Joe Scarborough.
Oh,
not a journalist. They give their opinion. Okay, and God bless them, but that's not what I do. And so so for me, in my mind, there's never been a better time to be a journalist than right now.
well, Byron, I think that is a wonderful way to end on. We really appreciate it. I thank you very much for taking the time. Any last closing thoughts? I'll let you say anything.
Yeah, bro. I thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be on with the Meredith College family. Thank you, brother. It's always good to see you. We are friends. I cherish your friendship. I value you. I respect you. You guys benefit from not only a talented man, but a good man. And last thing I'll say, like, to all the students in particular, like, dream big. Like, whatever your goal is for yourself, like, make it bigger. Like, your dream for yourself should be so big that people laugh when you say it out loud. Because our world needs you. We need you at your best and the gifts that you have. The fact that you go to one of the best colleges in the country, that tells me that you work hard, that you're really smart, you're probably raised right. And that means you've got everything to be as successful, however you measure success, as you choose to be. So my last words to you is however big you're dreaming, dream big and know that you can live that dream. Thank you, brother. God bless.
Thank you so much, Byron. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Everybody else, feel free to follow Byron on social media, and you can go to ABC, and of course he's on Nightline weekly. So hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for spending your day with us. Thank you. Take care, Byron.
Thank you, brother. You too.